Welcome to the TVGuestpert broadcast podcast. My name is Ariana Tejero. This is the show where we talk to innovators, creatives, entrepreneurs across the industry, and we get their perspectives. And the hope is that we and viewers can resonate and learn something from each of these experts. And today we're so grateful to be joined by Shannon O'Dowd. And Shannon is a hostess. She's also a hosting coach. And she co-authored one of my favorite books that I actually use very frequently with what I do. It's called the On-Camera Guidebook. She co-authored that with Jacquie Jordan, who owns TVGuestpert. And it's basically a walkthrough of things you should and shouldn't do as an expert and different tips for being on camera. So very useful, the On-Camera Guidebook. So anyway, welcome again to the show. And the first question is, what should I know? What should one know about being a host?
As you said, I've been hosting and a hosting coach and a media trainer for over 15 years. So I've heard all of the questions about being a host, and I've had every experience of my clients wanting to be Oprah Winfrey to Ryan Seacrest. I mean, you name it, I've heard it. I think that the most important thing that you need to know about being a host, I actually think there's two. Maybe even three. But the first one is there are so many different ways to make a living as a host. And I think that surprises people, right? So there are entertainment reporters, there are game show hosts, there's reality TV hosts, there are cooking channels, which is kind of a subset of reality. There is shopping channels. There is morning talk shows in general, infomercials, commercial spokesperson, and even live hosting like trade shows and conferences, which you can make decent money at. So I think that's the first thing that's pretty important to know is, there's a lot of different avenues, and the main skills to be a host is, being able to handle a lot of copy into the camera, obviously. It's also being able to banter, right? Being able to handle what's not scripted and fill time. And the third thing is being able to interview. I'd say that's the other really important component of being a host. There's some jobs that need more of one than the other. So finding those sweet spots for yourself and kind of moving forward from there is a good thing to know. Yeah.
Those are three excellent tips, very straightforward. And you mentioned jobs. So where does one start when finding a hosting gig?
So the first thing that you need in the hosting world is a reel, right? Which is, it's about a 2-minute sizzle, if you will, with industry term, of the highlights of your work. And that can feel very daunting to someone when I first say it, but it's good news, because in the hosting world, yes, that's kind of your entrance into the gate, into the world of hosting. You have to have that reel to be considered for work. But once you have it, it can often substitute for the audition process, right? So instead of like a commercial where you're driving all over town or submitting self tapes, that reel can really stand in the place of an audition, at least for the first round or two. And then maybe you do a callback or you meet with producers, but it really is the representation of your work. And the other piece of good news is it's very easy to self-produce. Especially in these times of iPhones, you can really put your own reel together relatively simply with iMovie, with your iPhone, with some decent lighting, with some shots out in the world that are very lifestyle. You can cover a lot of the components of a reel.
I think also to that end, on a very low budget, because pandemic obviously changed the landscape of a lot of this. And I think maybe in good ways too, because people learn to be very creative and resourceful from home with things like key lights that you can buy on Amazon for pretty cheap. You can get those iPhone ring lights, which are great. Simple things like that, like little platforms for the laptop, step-ups for the host. What else? I think lighting is probably the most important, and then webcams.
Lav mics that can hook into your iPhone to kind of curate your sound a little bit better. Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff was really stepped up during the pandemic.
And with the mics too, I mean, some of them are such good quality, and you have even like mic screens that plug into the iPhones now that our reporters use professionally. So all this being said, like you said, it's very easy to accomplish from home. And also auditions, when we talk about auditions for gigs, pandemic has also changed that very in an extreme way. So a lot of people now are auditioning, sending tapes from home versus going in person. So what are the advantages, disadvantages of that?
Oh my goodness. Great question. I would say probably 80% of auditions are self-tapes now. So, the advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is you don't have to leave your home, right? You're not driving all over town to do an audition. The other advantage is you get to curate exactly what casting sees. If you walk into a room, they may give you a take or two, but you don't have any control over, the final product. You have a ton of control with self-tapes. You can just do it over and over again for hours if you want until you get it exactly the way that you want. So there's a lot of control in self-tapes. I think the negative or maybe not so wonderful thing about self-tapes is I think casting, well, first of all, casting puts the onus on the talent to execute an entire audition, and sometimes there's several scenarios or several props that need to be used, or there's multiple scenes that you're kind of having to cut together. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm like producing a whole spot here, right? So that can be kind of time consuming and a little overwhelming. I think the other negative, for lack of a better term, is because you have the time to curate your audition, I think casting has really raised the bar on what they expect to see, right? I think they really expect to see something that's almost perfect, set, ready, right? As opposed to if you walk in the room, they're like, oh, well, they just got it, 10 minutes ago, we can work with them on set. I think the bar is raised with the self-tape world.
You know how people say 80% of the time, your first answer is always right. So I imagine that applies to with auditions, especially being live to tape is such a skill. And I think that when you're recording over and over and over and over, sometimes you lose that zest, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always say to my clients, you're not allowed to do it more than 6 times. Right? Because I think after that, your frustration starts to kick in, the newness is lost. Some people are really gifted and they can keep finding it, every single time. But I think that's really a challenge. But there is an advantage to, the playback and being, oh, wow, I have a shadow over there, or I kind of whispered on this line and you really couldn't hear what I was saying, or, I really need to, I need to kind of, I'm a little in profile. I really need to be more into camera for this line so you can see my reaction. There's a lot of things that you can fix and tweak.
I've heard too that some managers, especially in the live TV industry, that when they're looking through tapes, they actually watch only like the first, let's say 20 seconds and on mute. So it's important to be very engaging and very on and very animated. And especially, when you're doing this 5-6 times, sometimes you can lose that. So maybe the first take ends up being the best one. To that end, how do you read the room when you're at home, like in your bedroom, putting these sides together?
You can't. You can't. And I mean, I have heard casting, and I think this is probably more true in an MOV spot where it's really reactions, where there's no sound. I think it's probably less true when it's like a spoke spot and it's all dialogue, because they have to listen for accents or verbal tics and everything. But I do think that they probably only watch the first 15 seconds. So you have to realize, like, if an average breakdown has like 6 or 8 roles, there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 people being submitted for a role, right? And then the casting director probably only sees 35 to 50 people per role, but still, that's 6 roles. It's still a lot of auditions to look through. So I think if a mistake is made early on, they're looking for reasons to, pass to the next person, right? I was going to say one other thing to you, and I cannot remember what.
It'll come back to you. That's part of hosting too, that sometimes you have this really good idea and then something comes up on the fly and you forget it, but it comes back at the end. There's a lot going on in your mind when this is happening.
Yeah. I mean, it was something about, submitting the self-tapes, but I honestly could talk about the audition process for hours.
Well, to plug your and Jacquie's book again, a lot of these tips are right there in the On-Camera Guidebook. And again, like, I'm not paid to say this or anything. I look through that book all the time, especially when giving advice to experts, when we're doing Zoom interviews, Skype, when it's not in person. And again, you can't read the room. You don't have the same, animation that you would in person. So a lot of the things you mentioned are very helpful when it comes to auditioning. And oh, it came back.
I remembered. Yeah, because your ultimate question was, how do you read the room? And I didn't quite answer that. I think without the feedback of the room, you have to rely on really reading the directions. Because it's very easy to miss a moment or a beat or some sort of note about who they're looking to have this person be, right? And you're pulling out different tools in your own tool belt of what version of you you're bringing. And I think the other thing is to look, if it exists, right? Look at the outlet you're auditioning for. If it's a commercial spokesperson, look at other commercials that are created by that brand. Companies don't change the feel of what they put out unless there's a major marketing overhaul, right? So if you look at existing work by that outlet or that brand, that's going to give you clues, right? As to like what they're looking for and what you actually want to bring to the table.
The research, attention to detail, very important.
A lot of people don't think to do that, right? And it does give you a leg up. Like, what do existing spots look like for this particular brand or outlet?
It's the same with, I think, interviewing for a company. It's like the more research you are, the more you know about the brand and the purpose, all of that, it's going to help you in the long run. And it shows that you're invested and interested. And that's another component that probably casting directors are looking for too. And even when booking experts on the news, investment is important.
Yeah. So, otherwise you're just like in a vacuum hoping you got it right.
Yeah. And then like, where's the passion? But research, attention to detail, production value, some of the things we talked about, like looking good, making sure you don't do the take too many times and lose energy, all of these things, again, that can be found in your book. I have one more question to catch you off guard as we end. What's the worst audition you've ever had, and how did you grow from that?
Wow. So sometimes I get these questions and it's like, I have no idea, but I actually remember, but I don't remember the product, which is probably a good thing. It was right after I had my daughter, who's now 11. So it was a long time ago. And it was my first audition back after having my daughter. And it was a ton of copy, a ton of words, and it was a spokesperson direct down the lens. And the worst possible scenario you can get when you have one of these auditions, in my opinion, is when they have a board with all the lines, but it's like not next to the camera, it's like over here in the room, right? So I was having such a hard time grabbing the words and getting them into lens. And I swear the session director kept having me do it, like, and not really giving me tweaks, but okay, let's do it again. And I just kind of got like, I really started to turn in on myself, and I really kind of started saying to myself, I can't do this, right? And I left there and I was like, I lost it. The second I had this baby, I lost my ability to perform. But I think when those things happen, at least for me, I have to look really inward and say, okay, how do I tackle this moving forward? And I think for me, that's been really great because I'm not an extrovert. I actually am an introvert. So I do get really nervous in front of people. And I think that's been my greatest quality as a host, because I feel for that in other people. And I have really worked on nervousness technique, breathing technique, mindset. Like, I know how to handle those situations so I can impart that information to my clients as well. So blessing and a curse, right?
And nerves are good too. I mean, you don't want to look
sometimes.
Yeah, I think definitely good, because you bring this, like we're talking about, energy on camera. You don't want to be, sitting in the chair like this and very low energy, because the camera won't love you as much, and vice versa. So nerves can be good. And then also,
you just need to know what to do with them.
Yes, how to channel them. Yeah. And another thing is, from what I've heard from actors especially, is that when you have a bad audition or what you perceive to be, sometimes that's the best. And usually it just has to do with you as a person, your charisma, the way you come across, right? Versus necessarily performance. Yeah, you want to be on your game. But I've heard the best advice is when you think it's a bad audition, to go right away, have ice cream, do something totally different, forget about it, throw it away. and don't linger, and cause yourself so much pain and torture. Like, oh, could I have done this better? This. So very tough to work on, but that's what I've heard, to go have ice cream and just like,
it's audition and forget. Audition and forget. That's definitely, sometimes that's easier said than done. Sometimes we get invested, right, in certain opportunities, and when they don't work out, you do have to lick your wounds. And I would like, okay, I'm giving myself 24 hours to feel bad about this, and then I'm going to move on, right? So self-care is also really important. It's an industry of rejection, and within that industry there are moments of triumph that we all live for, and being able to move quickly through the moments of rejection and really live in the triumphs, I think, is the challenge that we all face.
Yeah, and become a stronger person in turn, like in all parts of your life, because thick skin is important.
You got to have it.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was a great conversation and very transparent, which we like, very candid. Is there a place where viewers can find you online?
So I am pretty active on Instagram, and it's at the Shannon O'Dowd, ShannonOdowd. If you want to just book a free consult with me, if you have questions, you can always do that on my website, which is just shannonodowd.com.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, look for the book. We keep talking about it. Can't say it enough. It's very helpful, On-Camera Guidebook. And then look for Jacquie Jordan and TVGuestpert on all of the social media platforms, and also on her websites, I should say. Thank you so much, Shannon, and we'll talk again soon.